put together a brief presentation on some tips on improving your scientific writing. So let's get started with a quick question. And I do mean this seriously. How many of you chose your profession or decided to come to college because you really like to write? See? That's about what can you hear this?
Make sure that your speakers are muted.
What's that?
On your computer? Muted?
Oh, it is muted.
Okay.
If you get any feedback, let me know. I'll check it again, but I think I muted it before we got started.
And the microphone, is it microphone for the webinar? Yeah.
So that's all going. This one? Okay. All right. Sorry about that. So, well, the fact is I don't like to write either, and I didn't like it in high school, I didn't like it in college, and I don't like it when I have to do it on the job. That's why I became an editor. This way I don't have to write so much. The fact is, as I'm sure is true of all of you, I kind of struggle over it. I don't look forward to doing it. I sweat over it. I'm just sure it's never going to be good enough, and I keep rewriting and rewriting and struggling. So what I'm going to share with you today, it will probably not make you like writing any better, but I'm hoping that at least will give you a few tips to make your writing better and make you a little more confident about it. Oh, and I think Professor Tutumler was going to introduce me, but here he comes. We got started. Do you want to give me an introduction? I introduced myself. I just said I was Peggy. So.
That'll be fine. I
Okay.
had to teach class and
I-
finally made it back here.
That's fine. It really slipped my mind. I just was ready to go. So
Okay, have
Well,
you introduced yourself?
I just gave him my name and my job. That's about it. So
Great. For how many years have you been with us, or months, I should say?
with ICT, I just started in April. So relatively new here.
Now, let me quickly give a bio for Peggy Curran.
Yes.
Peggy has more than 15 years of experience as an editor of scientific publications, and she's worked as a managing editor for a peer-reviewed scientific journal. Has edited already more than 30 books on topics ranging from urban soils and tree biology to computer operating systems.
Yes. What a range.
She's a senior member of the Society for Technical Communication and served as president of the local chapter. Now, one thing about, again, the timing of having Peggy here to start with us at ICT, we had a backlog of all the reports, ICT reports. And she came with her hands full, actually, working on
Still are. That hasn't
on those
changed.
reports.
Yes.
So she's been really working hard to get us back on,
Yeah.
decreasing our backlog and putting those reports back on the ICT webpage. She's been doing a great job. She's a great asset for all of us to actually improve our writing skills, guys. And I hope this seminar will help to serve that purpose for everybody, all of our students doing a better job in drafting and writing reports.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, so just to backtrack a little bit, for those who just came in, I gather that nobody really chooses their, the professions and come to college because they really like writing. I mean, there are very just few people that just major in English or things like that where you're going to have to write. I, unfortunately, was one of them. I found out I didn't really like writing. So I went into editing instead. I did have a little stop along the way. I taught high school English for a couple of years. And the only thing that's done for me now is make me extremely picky about grammar. Maybe other editors aren't. I am. I don't know. I just have these little things that I always have to correct. So if ever I seem too picky, I apologize in advance. I'm really pretty easygoing about things like that. So anyway, looking at the lights here maybe. Would that help? Start from here. Okay, so I put together this very short, maybe 40-minute presentation on some things, quick things you can learn to improve your writing. And here's a little statement. Whoops. Why is it not going down? Hold on. Let me start again. Yeah, okay. I don't know why it's not going to my next slide here. Okay. Good. Okay, so I'm paging down. I'm paging down, but it's not moving the. What were you doing? This one, right?
Because you have two different
screen. You have to be on this one and then go the next
So-
one like this.
Just right here,
Mhm.
that arrow. Okay, I was hitting the wrong one. Okay, so some editor said this one time. If a paper is carelessly written, and I'm talking here about grammatical stuff, spelling problems, the reader may also think that you were careless in conducting your research. It is shocking. The cat was very surprised to find that out. But it is true, because if someone's reading your research, your research report, and they're stumbling over long, unwieldy sentences, grammatical errors, they're going to have a hard time getting to what you're trying to tell them. And they may also dismiss your research as being a little less than up to date. So let's imagine this. So you've put together, you've done all your research or your assignment, you've done all your studies, and you're going to turn your report in. And so you work on it for days and hours, and you come up with this, and it looks pretty nice, and you're pretty proud of it, and you return it in, and a few days later, this is what you get back. This was an actual report I edited, written by a professor in a different department. We're all great here. Not our professors are really good writers. So, yes, and I've sort of made it blurry and small because you don't really need to see what it says. You just need to see all the ink there. This was I chose this because it really does show how many changes can be made in a paper. This professor had only been in the United States, was not a native speaker of English for about a year. So that's probably more than most of the editing I would ever do. But if you got that back after working for days on your paper, this is probably be what you'd be thinking. It's called the grumpy cat. So anyway, I can't cover everything you need to know in one presentation because that would take really a semester at least. But I really think if you follow some of the tips I'm going to present today, your writing will be better off, and your writing will also be better than someone who doesn't follow these tips. They're very basic, easy to implement things, but they do make you sound a lot better. And they make your editors and reviewers and professors a lot happier. So when you write a scientific or technical report, there's usually three main aspects. There's your content, which is your subject you're writing about. There's the organization and the structure, which is going to be dictated by where you're submitting your paper. Is it, as a class assignment? Are you submitting it to a journal? So there's going to be different rules, but most of the time you're going to have introduction, materials and methods, all that stuff. But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to get down in the weeds and look at writing quality, which is also a very important part of it. When you're looking at writing quality, there are also three levels of focus. Paragraph level, kind of drill down. Sentence level, and then really looking at individual words and making sure you use them correctly. I also want to note here that punctuation is another aspect of good writing, but we're going to skip that, and you can thank me for that later. Maybe we'll talk about it one of these other days. I was asked specifically to touch briefly on paragraphs because a lot of people have trouble writing focused, coherent paragraphs. So there's not a lot to say about it. There's just some easy things to remember. A paragraph has one topic sentence or one main thought. And in scientific writing, most of the time that's going to be your first or second sentence of your paragraph. Then you develop that topic sentence. And that should all focus in and support the main idea, your topic. When it gets to length considerations, there's some problems. If it's too short, it's likely that you have not sufficiently developed that topic statement. If it's too long, it's likely that you are talking about too many topics in one paragraph. The biggest problem I see is the too short. They're just not sufficiently developed. I'll show you some more on that later. Most paragraphs, you want to go for an average of 4 to 10 sentences and about 80 to 200 words total. That'll get you right in the zone where you need to be. But anyway, so if your paragraphs are inadequately developed, if you're hearing that criticism from your editor, your professor, your coworker who's reviewing your work, here's some things you can do after you write your topic sentence. You give examples of it, you cite your data, you can define any important terms, You can do compare contrast, you can do evaluation, and you can examine effects and consequences. Okay. The caution here is you don't do all of these in the same paragraph, or you will be having the opposite problem, which is a paragraph that's ponderous and long and wanders all over the place. So those are just the one or two things you can do in each paragraph to keep you on topic. Here's a sample I pulled from a recent ICT report that I edited, and it's a good sample paragraph. It demonstrates what I'm trying to emphasize here. The topic sentence is there in red, the first one. This is about wrong way driving. They were trying to determine the main causes of wrong way driving. So they're saying what they did. They reviewed these criteria, and then the rest of the paragraph just discusses the facts they found. I counted them up. There's 8 sentences, which is right where you need to be, 130 words, which is right where we need to be. And keep this in mind, 20 words per sentence is about average for scientific and technical writing. And I'm not going to go back to the previous slide, but each of those sentences had 20 words or fewer in it on that sample paragraph. So you want to avoid too many, but now that we're looking at the sentence level, we've looked at the paragraph, now we're going to look at individual sentences. You got to avoid too many long sentences because it's difficult for the reader to digest your thoughts, to follow your line of thought, but also you're more likely to start getting into grammatical trouble when you have a long paragraph. A long sentence. So again, if you keep it to 20 words or fewer, you're going to be okay. Caution though, on the other hand, if you write too many short ones, it sounds choppy and it gets a little boring, and it really does sound more like elementary, basic level writing, not sophisticated college level or professional writing. So my advice is to mix it up, just kind of with rhythm. You want a little long, a little short, sounds better that way. Okay, one of the big problems with sentences is they're too wordy. A lot of people this is where we get them, we want to keep them short, 20 words or fewer. One of the chief problems, or the chief causes of wordiness is something that's called a nominalization, which, I don't expect you to know what that means or remember it. It's just when you take a verb and make it into a noun. So if you look at these examples, it's not going to work here. Anyway, the failure of the test was attributed to. The failure is a noun, but the verb is failed in the corrected sentence. So if you just say the test failed because, look at that, and look how many words you saved. So you're more direct. You're not using prepositional phrases. You're just using a lot more concise language. Another example, figure 3 contains an illustration of. Why don't you just say figure 3 illustrates? Another one, Smith's findings are a contradiction of the theory. Contradiction is the noun, but contradict is the verb. Use the verb. Smith's findings contradict the theory. Another thing in scientific writing is passive voice. A lot of people will say you should never use passive voice. I disagree with that. In scientific and technical writing, it seems to be the norm. It might be changing a little bit. I'm starting to see some journals request that the authors write in a more active voice, but passive is still the norm. However, we'll mix it up a little bit. You don't have to always use passive voice. Here are some examples. So you say a review of the primary aspects of the theory was made by Miller et al. Make it more active. Miller et al. Reviewed. Another one is, in this project, the effects of radiation were studied. In this project, we studied. You're getting rid of those verbs like is and us and were is what you're doing, and that makes your sentence a lot stronger. Another one, a discussion of our findings is provided, or in section 3. In section 3, we discuss our findings. Okay, here's a tip. Pardon?
No, I just have one question.
Yeah.
I remember when I was taking my English 101. They said to avoid to use the first person.
In technical and scientific writing?
Yes, they usually said don't write I or we or you.
Well, There's some validity to that, but still in most scientific and technical writing, people are still using the passive voice. It's still accepted. We're not quite there yet. I'd like to be there where we're doing that more often, but especially in the introduction and your conclusion, I really think using I and we is more powerful. So you can say, we studied this. There's nothing wrong with saying that rather than saying, you know, the effects were studied. It's okay to say we studied it. As I said, especially in introduction and conclusions. But it is okay and actually better to use a passive voice when the result is what you're emphasizing, not the person who did it. So, for example, you say this problem has been the focus of study since 1955. Okay, it's not important who's been studying. It's important that it's just been the focus of study. Or a new laboratory will be built next year. And we don't really care who's building it, unless you're paying the bills, I guess. But no, it's the fact the laboratory is going to be built is important. So we don't really need to have a person doing that, because that's not the important thing. Okay, another cause of wordy sentences is something called a noun string. And really what that means is you have a lot of adjectives in front of a noun, a lot of modifiers. So the modifiers are the underlined words and the nouns are the words in red. So if you look at that and you see we developed a building radon source location method. Okay, I especially like this last one here. This somebody in the government apparently wrote that. A human health and aquatic life protection water quality standard. That's quite a mouthful. So anyway, these are probably one of my pet peeves. I see them a lot, and I usually correct them. This is how they make me feel when I see those.
How would you change this?
Oh, I will show you. Okay, I wanted you to show how they make me feel first, and then I'll show you how we're going to fix them. But I do get rather grumpy when I see a lot of those. Sorry. Okay, here's what we can do. Okay, important note. These revisions are likely to be wordier than the original. And I'm standing here telling you, well, don't be wordy. So now I'm saying do be wordy. Well, it's okay to be wordy. These are much clearer, regardless of the fact that they have more words. They're easier to understand. So you look at the first one. So we developed a method for locating the source of radon in buildings. That just sounds more elegant to me. The second one, there's a couple ways you could revise that. Install a system for monitoring hazardous materials dispersion. I'm not really fond of that. I would really go with the second one of install a system for monitoring the dispersion or dispersal of hazardous materials. Same with the third one. The first example is okay, and if my little red pen would work. There's a problem with that first revision. Include a preliminary schedule for implementation. That's just doing what I told you not to do, is taking a verb and making it into a noun. But it's still better than the original. I would really go with something like include a preliminary schedule for implementing the pilot study. Okay, and then of course here's the really bad one that annoyed me about the Clean Water Act. You can just say it establishes standards for protecting human health and aquatic life. Just sounds much better. So you can often, when you're writing, you don't think you're doing this. And I wouldn't even worry about it when I'm writing my original, but when I went back to reread it, I'd be on the lookout for things like that. It's usually a really quick, easy thing you can check. You'll see lots of words ending in T-I-O-N or S-I-O-N, and these usually a hint that you've taken a verb and turned it into a noun. So try to find the verb and use it.
Shouldn't you be adding water quality standards in the beginning?
Pardon me?
Establishes water quality standards maybe for protecting.
Let me look.
Yeah, water quality.
So, I'm not sure what you're asking.
You're saying the Clean Water Act establishes
Establishes.
standards instead of that establishes water quality standards.
Oh, yeah, I should have put that in there. You're right, I was just typing too quickly. They do establish water quality standards. Good point. Even so, we move some of those adjectives away from that big long string and spread them out a little bit better, a little more gracefully. But good point. I was just cutting and pasting that from something else. I didn't carefully look at it. Okay, this isn't really wordiness, but it's often a source of great humor to me. They're called dangling participles, and I don't want to explain what I mean by participle because it's not important. But you can easily see what's wrong with the first sentence. Running to catch the bus, my keys fell out of my purse. So it sounds like your keys were running to catch the bus is the problem, not you. So I just imagine these keys running, flagging down a bus. Okay, what you do is you change it, and there's many ways to change this, but here's one. As I was running to catch the bus, my keys fell out of my purse. Okay, we can all laugh at that, but then sometimes these get a little more subtle and more difficult to identify, especially when you're doing serious writing, not making funny jokes like that. Using positive and negative controls, convincing data were collected. That sounds like the convincing data were using the positive and negative controls. You were, the researchers were. So you really have to make sure you specify who is doing this action. So the example rewrite would be using positive and negative controls, the researchers collected convincing data. And the last one is really even more subtle, and I admit I sometimes don't even catch these when I'm editing, or I don't catch them on the first time. I overlook them. Based on the results, we conclude that the mitigation measures were effective. Okay, what you're literally saying is that we are based on the results, and that's really not what you want to say. It's your conclusions that are based on the results. So those are a little harder to catch. They don't jump out at you quite as much as running keys. But you could also change that to based on the results, our conclusion. Now that's true. It's your conclusion that's based on the results. Or we conclude from the results. Here's a we again, but that's okay because we're doing conclusions. We conclude from our results that the mitigation measures were effective. These are some other sentence constructions you can avoid and should avoid. Not entirely, not 100% of the time. Sometimes they're fine, just don't overuse them. It's called an expletive construction, and I have no idea what expletive means because to me expletive means swear words. I don't know why they call it that. But it means sentences that start with there are, there is, it was, there were. Like there are many studies that have addressed blah, blah, blah. It's a much stronger sentence and has fewer words if you just say many studies have addressed. Or it is the purpose of. Why don't you just say the purpose of is to do whatever. Or you say it was evident that the hydraulic system failed. Well, just say the hydraulic system failed. So if you see a lot of those, that's another thing you can go back and check for after you've written your first draft. And just look at a few of those and see if you can change at least 50% of them. And I think you'll be a lot better off. You don't have to eliminate all of them. Sometimes rewriting them will make it sound pretty awkward. So don't feel like you have to change them all. Okay, well, now we're at the real bottom level, the words. And I think the overall things you want, especially in scientific and technical writing, you want to use the most correct, precise word that you can because science is about precision. And you don't want to have things misinterpreted. There are hundreds and hundreds of these things. These are just a few examples. The word because. Some people like to use as rather than because. And I don't advise that. It's just not clear. So you wouldn't say as he wasn't ready, we left without him. You say because he wasn't ready. Because as sometimes means while. And it's just not as clear. It's not as direct. You're talking about causation, so say because. Another one is since. I see this one a lot. It really, when you're doing formal writing, you should stick to using that only when you're talking about time or time that's passed. Like since the 1980s, whatever. Incorrect would say, since the data were not complete, the results were excluded. Really, what you want, you're talking causation there, so you want to say because the data were not complete. And here is my favorite one to change. Although I admit when I'm in a hurry, I just sort of gloss over it. But pay some attention to it. It really separates the good writers from the bad when they are aware of this thing. Compare. Do you compare to or do you compare with? I have to stop and look this up quite a bit, so if you have trouble with it, don't feel bad. Compare with means to examine the similarities and differences of two or three or whatever things. To compare to is more to state how something in one class differs from something in another class. For example, good one here. Compared with other crash types, wrong way crashes are often more severe. You're comparing all crashes to wrong way crashes. Perfect. Now, two, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Okay, you're comparing a person to a summer's day. They're not the same class. Okay, that's Shakespeare's sonnet, by the way. Okay, here. What?
It's like a Midsummer Night.
No, it's a sonnet. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. I majored in English, so I heard a lot of Shakespeare. But here's your quick and easy tip. In scientific writing, compare with is almost always going to be the right choice. So I'd say just use it all the time. And if it should be compared to, maybe your editor will change it back. Okay, let your editor do that work. You'll be right 95% of the time if you stick to compare with. I realize I'm generalizing a lot here. Okay, data, always plural, informal writing. People are arguing about that a lot these days, but I'm going to stick with plural for a while. It's okay in informal writing or emails or things like that, or just talking, but most scientific journals and sources, things like that, really do still require that to be used in the plural. Easy one to check for. Just do a word search in your document every time you see the word, and search for the word data, and then look at it to make sure you're using it with the plural verb. Need, that's one of my pet peeves. Inanimate objects do not have needs. People have needs. So you should use must, or should, or required, just some other terminology. For example, I see constantly more research is needed. Okay, research is an inanimate object. It doesn't need anything. So we just say required, for example. Or core samples need to be prepared according to the protocol. Well, okay, that should just be should or must be or something like that. So if you see the word need, that's another one. Search for that. If you see yourself using a lot, ask yourself, can I change this to a more precise word? Percent and percentage, these are another easy one to find. If you know the difference, it makes you look smart. Percent is used only with a number in front of it, like 28%. Otherwise, it's percentage. So you would say like the percentage of the population or the percentage of our controls, things like that. Easy to remember. Principal and principal. We're not going to talk about high school principals because that's just not germane to scientific writing. We have principal with the PAL usually means your main or your primary, like your principal researcher, okay, or your principal focus of your study. It means your primary. If you can substitute the word our main focus, our primary focus. Principle with the LE on the end really refers to fundamental laws or universal truths, things like that, or things that are accepted as true.
Physics law.
What?
Physics law.
Yes, exactly. So the principles of good research, principles of physics, a man of strong principles. That's another one that's easy to find, so I'm giving you all the easy ones. Here's one I struggle with a lot. I've been pretty good about just overlooking it, but I think I'm going to start coming down on this one again. Utilize and use do not mean the same thing. Okay, I know, again, I should probably have that shocked cat face up there because I'm probably telling you something you've never heard or never occurred to you. Utilize, I believe it's used because people think it is more scholarly. And if you're writing scientific writing, it is scholarly writing. However, it's not scholarly to use something incorrectly. So let's look at the way they do mean. Utilize means to use an object for something other than its intended purpose. Like in an emergency, a screwdriver can be utilized as a bottle opener. That. It also means to use something to its best advantage, and this is where you're going to see it in more scientific term. If a diet contains too much phosphorus, calcium is not utilized efficiently. Most of the time you just want to use the word use. Here's some incorrect examples. I just want to give you some. So you could, really what you want to do is you would use the word use in all of these rather than utilized. We utilized a survey to gather opinions. Or I like this next one. The researchers reported an average error between 5 and 10% depending on the dialectic constant estimation technique utilized. I had to underline something in there. Why? Does anybody know why I underlined that? It's another example of noun strings or noun stacks, they call them. I would rewrite that. Not only would I change that, I would also change that whole sentence to get rid of all those nouns right in a row. Another one is, this was used correctly in a report, but I made it wrong, so I could use it as an example. The study highlights the importance of utilizing energy-efficient lighting systems, such as LEDs. The author used the word correctly, but I changed it just so I'd have a good example. So, thank you, author. We can just gloss over these. Another thing, use fewer words. Don't use 5 words when one will suffice it. Hundreds and hundreds of examples of this is going to happen. Here's a few. I'm not going to go over them all, but you get the point here. Due to the fact that means because, a decreased number of, fewer. It is possible that, you could say might. During the course of, just say during. Some more, look at them yourself. You can see them on your PowerPoint handout. Just wanted to give you some ideas, give you something to think about. Okay, I have saved this one to the end because I want to emphasize it. Due to, this is another term that's often overused in scientific writing. And I've even had some professors do the shocked cat face on me when I say that. He's not here right now, but he did, I can tell you that. Okay, it does have a correct use, but in order to figure out its correct use, you get to do something called, you have to figure out the difference between adjectival prepositional phrases and adverbial prepositional phrases. Would anybody like to hear about that? No, I don't want to even explain it. It's boring. Okay, so here is the most valuable piece of information you're going to get today. This is going to change your life. It's going to make your editor happy, and there will be no more grumpy cat faces. Okay, this is all you need to know. If the word immediately before due to is a to be verb, such as be, is, are, was, were, then due to is correct. Let me amend that. Okay, then due to is almost always correct. You're always going to find an exception. But again, if you just follow this little rule, you're going to be right 99% of the time. So, if you look at the sentence, the rising price of gasoline is due to many factors. Okay, you look at the due to, look at the word before it, which I've helpfully underlined for you. It is the word is, which is a to be verb. All right, you can use it. Other example, if the word immediately before due to is not one of those verbs, if it's a noun or something else, most likely it's going to be an incorrect use and you need to change it, and I'll give you some ideas. The meeting started 30 minutes late due to the weather. Here's the due to. The word late is not a verb like is or as. It's an adverb in that sentence. In those cases, if it doesn't pass that test, change it. What you could say, for example, is the meeting started 30 minutes late because of bad weather or as a result of bad weather, things like that. So it's a very complicated topic, but I boiled it down to like a little simple rule you can follow.
But no since.
Pardon?
But no since.
What?
We cannot say since but not, right?
Oh, since, you mean you couldn't say?
Instead of because or due to.
I don't think that would work in that sentence. So you would say, since the weather was bad, the meeting started. I'd stick to because. And that's only because since means time, like since yesterday or since last year. or, since the first time I taught this class. I mean, we really need to be talking about time. But yeah, you could say, because of weather, the meeting started 30 minutes late. You can kind of switch them around too, but just avoid using due to unless it immediately follows a verb, a to-be verb. All right, well, this is a closing thought I'm going to leave you with. I've always heard this, but I never knew who said it, so I had to look it up on Google. I would have written a shorter letter, but I did not have the time. And that is really the essence of good writing. Good writing is short, well, not short, it's concise, it's clear, it's brief, it gets to the point. It doesn't wander around with these big flowery phrases. It takes more work to write a short, concise paper than it does a long, wordy one. That means it takes more effort. So you're either going to do the effort when you write it, or you're going to do the effort when your professor sends it back to you and tells you to revise it. So my advice is to spend the time up front. This was also attributed to Mark Twain, but apparently I was incorrect. I thought that's who had said it. Okay, on your notes, I've got some handy resources to some tutorials, some really nice explanations. These are not scholarly, dry, boring things. They're all pretty interesting and have some fun examples. You can use those. Here's my references. You might be able to find some more things in there. I'm just citing these because you have to cite your references. And so here we're left with a few minutes. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or if we can find time to do more topics like on writing in the future, I'd love to hear if there's any specific problem areas or ideas you want me to talk about. I mean, I was so general today. I was really just kind of giving you the quick and dirty tips. But there might be specific problems you've had in your writing, specific concerns you have. If anybody has any ideas, let me know. You can email them to me. You can tell me right now if they pop into your head. So, anyone? Miss?
You mentioned about being concise, and one of the things you said when you were a professor, and that's why professors put limits on the pages, because they would like you to really think about it and consolidate your thoughts. You're not rambling, but it's not just in your college papers, but as Peggy will attest, has developed writing standards for the papers that you do for ICT projects. And they have a 75-page limit on them. And for the very same reason, is nobody wants to read something that meanders all over the place. They want a concise paper, and so that forces you to be concise by having those page limit requirements.
Right. And usually your first draft is going to be a lot wordier and have more words or page length than your requirements. So just write them down. It's perfectly okay just to do the brain dump and just get it all down there. And that'll take a lot of time, but then take a little more time and go back and start thinking about where can I prune out some of the dead wood. I say that because I used to work for a tree organization. We studied trees and the science of trees. So we're always trying to prune out the dead wood. That's really what you're doing. You can get rid of a lot of that excess weight. And finally, this is starting to work. Yay. Okay, there's my email address. Okay, so any questions? If this is your first time here, I believe we were going to do a quick tour of the building if anybody's interested in that. Some of the new people here. The rest of you, I hope there might be some pizza left or a soft drink, so help yourself.
And make sure you signed up on the
Yes.
sheet that went around.
If you didn't get the sign-up sheet, who has that?
It's by the telephone number.
Up over here. If you didn't, so there's a sign-up sheet here. If you didn't get a chance, please do sign in. I thought I had my grumpy cat there again. Thank you.